Hello, everyone, and welcome to the higher ego, the topic of humor. This is the fourth of a series of three. Wait, how did that work? Yes, we were going to do a series of three, but for some reason, the higher ego spoke up and said, hey, what about humor? The fourth function of the higher ego, as I so clearly outlined it in On the Technique of Acting. So Joerg and I listened to our higher ego, and despite being absolutely terrified about talking about humor, we decided, well, we must create an event on the higher ego around humor, no matter how sad or scary or sorrowful it may turn out to be. So, yes, ladies and gentlemen, I am Lisa Dalton from the National Michael Chekhov Association, and I am here with the famous...
I don't know if I'm famous. I'm Joerg from Michael Chekhov International Academy, close to Berlin. Now I'm sitting here in my little house under the roof and talking with Lisa about the humor. And it's a funny thing, I think, to talk about humor. And everybody is waiting for that we are very making very much jokes or something like that. But we won't go to the theme, at least very serious. Is that right, Lisa?
That is exactly right, Joerg. That is so exactly right. We are going to take this very seriously. Now, I'm going to launch into this. There are a lot of times when, frankly, when we start this, I have no clue what I'm going to say. So I turn it immediately over to Joerg to open the event. But today, I actually am going to give you a very serious talk about this. And then I'm going to let Joerg talk. And I'm going to keep the camera on me, even if he starts talking right now. So I hope that's okay. Is that all right, Joerg?
I have to think about it. I have seriously to think about it. That's not so easy what you are suggesting now. Okay. Okay, you have your camera on and you have switched me off, and now I can go to sleep. Okay, yes. Go ahead.
Okay, as we said, it is true that in On the Technique of Acting, Michael Chekhov outlines four functions of the higher ego, and we've discussed those at great length in the three previous higher ego talks. And now we're really looking at humor and the nature of humor, and it's a relationship to the higher ego. So to begin with, if you have had a class in Michael Chekhov's technique, I bet it has been really fun. And we have a saying that if it isn't fun, it isn't Chekhov. And one of the things that even makes fun possible is the presence and the existence of the higher ego itself. In fact, without the higher ego, we would be animals. And as animals, we could whine, or we could grin. But we could not laugh with delight, and we could not weep in grief, because it is the higher ego that allows us to have that sense of spirit and the sense of ourself and create a relationship to the other. And this is where the role of laughing and weeping, of delightfulness and cheerfulness versus grief live. Cheerfulness and grief live in that realm of spirit, and the physical representation of that in its extremes is laughter and grief. And it's always in relation to the outside of us, to the other. And so this higher ego gives us our creative individuality, meaning individually I can create. You can create individually, separately from me, and separately from each other. And with that sense, we have the great law of polarity that is at play, and with this sense of delight, of cheerfulness, of humor versus sorrow, sadness, and grief. And it connects with our physiology this in the same way that it connects with the energetic field. So when the higher ego is interested in stepping away from and getting a larger perspective from the lower ego, it expands. And this is what happens in humor. Our energy of the self lifts out of the lower ego perspective and expands like a balloon. So it can sort of float up and hover and see the larger perspective from a more objective perspective. And when we do that, we can see higher truths, and we're much less caught in our own sense of anxiety, our own sense of fear, our own sense of a need for power, a need for validation, etc. We can be humorous, and from that objectivity, we can find our way into compassion. And when we go into actual human sorrow, we contract, and we contract from the lower ego more deeply into ourself. So our sorrow becomes about experiencing and strengthening my sense of who I am as an individuality. So if we can see that the sorrow brings us into this contraction and a deep awareness of myself, and the expanding allows me to escape that narrow sense of self into a higher sense of objectivity. And with that, because polarity always, these contrasts happen in at least a triplicity, we can say that that sense of cheerfulness, if it overexpands, then it can turn into a sense of sarcasm, where we're using humor, not humorously. We're using it as a critical weapon. We place ourselves above, and it's really what we've done then is we've lifted or tried to lift the lower ego to a higher place of priority. And so that is not our healthy process. You can see in sarcasm, it's an attempt to elevate oneself by putting down the other, and it literally forces you into the contraction. And that is a mechanism that is going to produce a negative wave of impact. So there's a big distinction between sarcasm and humor and wit. And the opposite of when sorrow comes, we can go deeply into sensing ourselves. And that is important if we've gotten over expanded to ground us. And so a good cry, a good solid cry, when we feel we've lost someone, like this is ourself, I've lost a job, I've lost a lover, I've lost a parent, I've lost my health, whatever it is that we've lost, we feel it being taken away from us. And this sorrow and weeping brings us into connection with ourself So it's a way of balancing. And this is critical for us to understand, because this gives us, what you see up here behind me, the path of comedy and tragedy in our art. And this is the role of us in the performances that we bring forward to help our audiences either lift themselves out into a higher sense of self, or to ground themselves more deeply into their individual humanity. So it's interesting to notice that not only do these polarities help find us a balance, but they are reflected in the physical process itself. So we see that the breath is absolutely a reflection of this sense of humor. So when there's humor, we all breathe more easily. That sense of expansion actually manifests in the way the body mechanically creates a laugh. So if you take for a moment, just take a moment and find yourself laughing. I'm going to unmute everybody, and I want everyone to go ahead and laugh. And it may be completely fake. That's okay. Unmuting, go ahead and laugh. Okay, beautiful. I'm going to go ahead and mute you all. And what we experience is in order to laugh, a big expansion first. So once again, I'm going to invite you to laugh, but before you laugh, I'd like you to take a big exhale. And before you inhale, try to laugh. Here we go. I'm unmuting. Okay, take a big exhale. Laugh. Big inhale now and laugh. Excellent. Muting again. Thank you. So we can start to feel how that expansion allows us, and it's this long expansion and these shorter exhales. And then remarkably, when we go into the sorrow, we have a long extending exhales and short inhales that tend to get caught in the speech mechanism, where through the grief is beyond words. So the speech mechanism tends to work as a gate for blocking the expression of words, so that you can go more deeply into that. So that's a lovely, important idea to understand if you ever need to perform laughing and crying. And I hope that you start to understand how what happens in our spiritual realms is reflected then in the physical body there. So just to look at the a couple of more points. We can think of the expanding process and the sense of humor as it is about lifting yourself out and above and being able to see the larger whole. And the sorrow, again, contracts into yourself. It's, oh, poor me. It's about the poor me. And some people like to go into grief and wallow in it, because they love the sense of their selfness. They're, ooh, I love feeling myself intensely, my intense pain. Ooh, ooh, ooh. And in that case, they are going beyond the higher values of this inward strengthening of your higher I and its presence in your life. and going more deeply into the lower ego and hardening and firming an inward exhale that does not allow them to take in and breathe in the world. And this is, of course, going to cause dis-ease, and it's going to cause a sense of disconnection and dissociation from each other. So humor is a gift for us to help us, again, lift ourselves up and out. And it is one of the key things that is only possible through your higher ego. And it is one of the things that makes you a human being as opposed to an animal. And with that, I'm going to relinquish the spotlight and invite Joerg to step in. Well, you're
okay.
up.
Now you have everything said, and we can finish this session. That's great. We save a lot of time, and everybody can have the humor with oneself. Maybe also a point. Lisa, what do you think about that?
Oh, sure, we can wrap this up right now. You know, when your colleague agrees so fully with everything that you said, it feels so nice. I think I'm getting overinflated.
Yeah. There is, of course, something always with humor and with the laughing and with the joking. And there are subtle differences between humor and making jokes about something. And there, what is also a kind of a distance to something. And seeing something from outside, but it is mostly in a way of a kind of a subtle judging something in a way what is not giving freedom. In this way, a special kind of jokes maybe, yeah. And the laughing has also, it's also such a thing, yeah. Laughing is not always humor. Even when in the laughing something happens that one is going outside of oneself. And this laughing can just turn and become also a kind of judging what is not the humor. The interesting humor is, at least when we go to the roots a little bit, it has to do with a kind of a balance. That's very interesting. We don't think so much when we have a nice humor-like situation, and we are making some nice things in the way of humor with each other. The word humor comes from this meaning of a balancing between all the four temperaments. When all the four temperaments are in a balance, this is, of course, at least a question of consciousness in our time. Then we have that was what the Greek named as humor, that all the four forces are in balance. And this had for the Greek people something to do with the inner liquids in the body in different areas of the body and so on. This is interesting to have a research for that when one would like to go to the temperaments, the four temperaments. What is in our time, I think, very much forgotten. Very much forgotten. It's a nice thing to understand, even for acting, the question of temperament of a character. And okay, they said the balance between all these four, this is what they named humor. And In the humor, the soul goes out a little bit, goes more out of the body. And there are two things, Lisa. One is that one has a full overview on one hand about the situation. And the important point in it, seems to me also, is that in this overview, there is also the relationship to oneself. One comes in a kind of a distance to oneself. And one sees oneself, okay, yes, of course, the same, okay, I'm part of that bloody situation, but I see myself from outside and I can see that I couldn't change it because I am as I am from the normal point of view. But my higher self tells me, yeah, you see, you are on one hand just like everybody else, no different, a crazy person, but you can see yourself from outside. And maybe that's what is teaching you something. And this teaching is not, this teaching is a kind of I understand, maybe there's something I have to do. Maybe there's something I have to develop in the relation to myself. So that's something what I would just add to it, that of course this humor gives us a wonderful help to come in distance to us, to see ourselves. And from that point of view, I would like to come back to another point, but maybe I stop here and we can open it up on this layer, and there's another point what has to do with the higher ego and the good and evil and with the contemporary life. What is just the connection for the humor? Humor is in this field. So, but I say, let's say we stop here for now, and maybe we can ask Ophir or some of the others who has a question.
I have a question for you.
Oh my God, Lisa.
So anyway, I'm very excited about that future discussion you just planted. So there's some perspective that the humor, one reason that we go out of ourselves, or the timing of when we go out of ourselves, is that it's when the ego can't quite understand what has happened as a logical thing. Do you know what I'm talking about? That concept, Joerg, because I don't fully understand it. I'm wondering if you do. And I don't know if it has something to do with this sort of banana peel effect, where a homeless person walking down the street who slips on a banana peel and falls activates our compassion. But a person who is very rich and very fancily dressed walks down the street and slips on a banana peel, and we laugh. And the laugh comes because our everyday self doesn't understand the logic when things go out of logical sequence, when there's incongruity and surprise. So, but the fundamental idea that was presented about humor to me from Rudolf Steiner's work, and I was looking at this, made a statement about when the ego can't understand, so it sort of comes out. Do you have any? Can you help me understand that?
Yeah, that's I would say in this meaning that the The higher ego is always present and is always also perceptual. And when the lower ego in my daily life, when I'm walking through at the street, isn't not understanding something, but then from another layer of my consciousness, from a higher point of view, then I realize what happens. Then I'm laughing and I think, or then I get another perspective and another understanding. And this can be laughing and it can be some painful thing. It depends also of the situation of myself in this moment. It is not absolutely free. I can also laugh about a poor person who is falling from the banana. I think it's not logically that it is only because of the social layer. But it is, when it is made in films, then it is in a way, of course, prepared that you do it in this or this way. That's quite the construction of the plot. It has to do with this, that in a perception and in the understanding, in the consciousness, how my soul is taking the perception in a kind of a understanding. In this way, there is needed what we have called the creative ego. As long as the things are going in the normal logical way, somebody is walking and then I see the door and the person is running against the door, it's logic, then I can laugh that the person hasn't seen the door and is running against it. I understand that, but in this moment, I understand not so much. I understand it also, but the laughing doesn't come out of that I see the person running against it. The laughing comes out of that I understand that this person didn't see it. So this is a different perspective. It comes from a different point of view. I go over that limits of myself. I'm not standing in myself. And yeah, maybe this is, I don't know if it helps to understand better for you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And yes, Ophir, I'm going to unmute you. And do you have a question for us?
I just want to say something and then maybe you pick it up from there. I see humor so connected in the actor point of view or the artist. It's so connected to the audience in a few ways. I mean, if you think about a director who's directing now a comedy or something, he needs always to be in the mind of the audience and say, when is the puenta? I don't know how you say it. When is the punch? Where is the laughter will be? And he directed this rhythm and this and with in his mind the audience. And it's something that Vakhtangov talks about, and it's something that Chekhov talks about. Always be with the audience. And in comedy, it's very, very, very present. Another thing is the relationship, the humor relationship to the feeling of ease that Chekhov is talking about. You can't deliver humor without ease, and the audience will receive this comedy or this humor only with ease. And I always see it very, very connected to the audience, and it's outside, always outside a bit from the actor. And maybe one more thing, that the humor is so unifying, like the higher ego is doing it. Yeah, so it's so unifying in a way that like I take the father or the mother of all comedies, Molière, or the Commedia dell'arte, and when the actor is putting the mask, immediately the whole audience knows something and gets something from it, like the direction of the mask and the color of the mask, and it's bringing the audience together. So that's something that that I wanted to share and say. I don't know if it's yeah. I
Yeah,
also
yeah, that's great. Yeah.
mhm.
There we-
Pantalone.
Yes, that would be correct. That would be correct. And you got to show yours again, buddy.
Here is my pantalone.
Uh-huh. Beautiful.
Okay, my dear. Um, that's of course one aspect, but humor is not only comedy. Of course, we have in a kind of a comedy or whatever, all this kinds of that range of that performance art. There is sometimes there's humor, but sometimes there are only jokes, and sometimes there is only a provocation to make someone laughing. And this can lead just to something different. The laughing can lead sometimes that one feels much better, oneself feels much better than that what one is laughing about. This is not humor. This is not humor. This is egotism. The humor frees myself from the egotism, sees the situation in a way more objective, but also sees oneself in it, at least the actor itself, in his mission for the theater, in his mission for the people, for the audience, that one is part of it on one side, can't change the situation on one hand, but on the other hand is understanding that it couldn't go in another way, as it just was happening, as it just is on. And this is, of course, an understanding from another higher point of view. And of course, it has to do, as you spoke about that, with the audience. It has to do with a contemporary life. And it has to do with a good and evil. Good and evil, it doesn't matter where you put one in the heaven, one in the ground, or one to the left side, one to the right side. These are the general forces in our life. And how can we find a relationship? Not to become selfish because we are so wonderful, so good, or not becoming so painful because we are so about that and that we are terrified by the bad things, that we can find something between, that we can find an understanding of both sides on one hand. We have talked about that with the good and evil. That's not so easy. And then also to accept this situation and trying to find a new relationship to that what one has understood. What is a good and what is a evil. And this needs, including myself, this way of humor to see something is there as it is. I can't change it now, maybe tomorrow. And I understand that, and I understand how the things are happening, crossing each other. And it gives me an inner smile. And maybe it gives me also an outer smile. And maybe when it happens surprisingly that I understand, it gives me a laughing. But this laughing maybe is a little bit different as it is ha 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 ha. And yeah, that was one point I wanted also add to it. It has to do with the audience. It's also then with the relationship to the contemporary life is that the actor has to find also this relationship to his part also from the point of humor. Because true art, on one hand is said, is not possible without humor. I need that humor also as a safety for myself, that I not get selfish. I believe that I have found out how the character is, and I know the absolute truth about the character. I have understood the play, I know, but I need the humor and need to say to myself, maybe everything is a little bit different. Maybe it is not just that what I see and how I acted. Maybe I become aware, I take the reactions, I take the directions, I play with it, I observe myself, all of the distance. How can I manage it? Maybe that what I was thinking, how it is the right way, I have to change it. Well, but I was very, very intense in it, it's the right way. So, and this, I think for that one needs humor, that one not get stuck in oneself. And this is again such thing of open, going out. My body is here, but my soul enlarge herself. Normally I'm with me in daily life. I react and act and get angry and get hungry and feel something and also laugh about a joke. It's normal, it's wonderful. But for such special situations, for some, also for my creations, I need the humor to have it, even to my creations, feeling of ease in the distance to it, that it is in a distance to it. And that is also what is in the relationship to the audience, and also to understand our life, what is outside happening, outside of the theater happening, to see it with humor. I think that's a very actual question. Can we see that all with humor? And can we see good and evil in it? But can we see it also with humor? That we not get terrified, that we stay as an inspired, free, artistic person with our creative ego and with our artistic creativity, our artistic abilities, free in even that situation, that we not block by any fear or any thinking, oh, I know it better or whatever, block our creativity. I think the creativity needs to find the humor, and its reverse, the humor is freeing the creativity.
That is beautiful, Joerg. I have a few things to say about that, but Tara has raised her hand and I'd love to hear from her. Tara, I'm unmuting you.
Hi, thank
Here
you.
you go.
Yeah, it was a couple of things that you were talking about before about the nature of sarcasm and how that's seen or how people might use it. Being Irish, it's something that in Ireland, sarcasm is used a lot as a way of showing how much you love somebody. If you are too earnest with people, very sincere all the time, and you don't laugh at somebody, somebody feels like you can't handle it, so they need to be polite with you. So then if somebody doesn't joke with you, or maybe sarcasm is the wrong word then, perhaps, but in that sense that to use humor and laughing at the people that you love, or laughing with them, in a sense, it gives a sense of, I know you feel comfortable with me and I feel comfortable with you, that I don't need to be polite with you. Does that relate to something, or when we
Well,
talk about how, yeah.
I'll jump in there just with some thoughts about that, growing up in my family, the biggest goal was to be the wittiest person at the dinner table. And if you could make a sarcastic and witty and clever remark, even at your own expense, it was a higher value, right? The intellectual wit, the critical wit was of higher value. And as I eventually learned how sort of painful many of those barbs were, I began to invite the higher self to help me reveal, how can I find the value of the camaraderie, the message that I hear you, see you, feel you, and love you, and enjoy you. How can I let that come through with humor that uplifts and helps bring the person out? My dog is snoring. My dog is snoring. Here's my dog. So you hear him snoring in the background. There you go. What can I say? So to say culturally, when you have this environment, it took a family to say, okay, there is pain happening here, and we're going to see if we can keep our sense of humor and create a warm path towards each other through it. So it's actually something that I invite you to look at and see and experiment with, using the higher ego to find a pathway to the, how can I connect with warmth and humor in a way that uplifts this person, and rather than creating an outward response that creates an inward separation. So that would be my suggestion. Does that help? Is that a helpful idea?
Yeah, it's something that, like, in Ireland we talk about a lot, because you can talk about individual pain, but Ireland as a collective, its history is very painful, and so this has been a way of, perhaps it really is something that Irish people would identify with, that kind of humor. And like you say, it's it'll be interesting to look at it again. But I know that at Ireland as a culture, we have talk shows even about this topic, the way our type of humor and the way that we connect and relate to each other in society, our TV shows, our books, and within our families and friendship groups. It's something that's really, really present. So yeah, I mean, it's something that we can't change society as a whole. It's just how you experience it yourself and those around you. But it's a topic of conversation for us, that where humor lies and the nature of it in Ireland.
I think that's a really healthy step toward the actual transformation of the community, because in eras past, without the media as a medium for a nationwide conversation, then there's no way to help people understand that it is a part of the culture. And when they do, through all of this media discussion, understand that it is part of the culture, they can begin to separate any personal pain that they're identifying with it, And also because change only occurs one person at a time, one thought at a time, one action at a time. When we transform the emotional response to something, then we have the ability to change also our thoughts about it and our actions for it. So the awareness itself, I think, is the first clear step. And from there, you know, go experience and experiment with what it's like to create that warmth from a higher place, and go on some talk shows and spread that word.
Yeah, I just see Beth saying there about Jewish humor. I have some Jewish friends, and we spoke about how much we relate to each other because of this self-deprecating sense of humor. That's really interesting that she said that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So we fall into that sense of gaining status through our pain. You know, oh, I had a horrible day. Oh, you did? My day was worse. Oh, no, mine was much worse. Mine's much worse. So we have this sort of classic battle for who's had the worst struggle there. So yeah, it permeates many cultures. And I was, you know, married into the Jewish culture, so I had quite a bit of experience with with that particular sense of shared suffering. And that sense of shared suffering is, you know, as Beth is saying, is a bond in the historical pattern and pathway of the Hebrew culture, the Judaic culture. And I see Ophir from Israel has his hand up. So Ophir, you want to share something?
Yes. The interesting thing that I wanted just before she wrote about the Jewish humor, I wanted to say something also to Joerg. He said it's balancing. So a week ago, it was the Holocaust Memorial Day, and I saw an amazing short film, and I also have a book here about it. The people in the Holocaust, I never thought about it. They were, always the question arose, did they have humor? Did they laugh? And eventually we see that yes, and they say that they had to laugh. They had to, and this is something of what Joerg's talk about, the balancing. They told jokes. They did theater in the ghetto. They did theater in the camps. A German Jewish girls did in, I think, in Auschwitz, they did, I think. For Polish Jewish, they did theater. It's amazing, and it's something of a survival also. So this is maybe what do you mean by balancing, not to joke because we are laughing, but now it's something of a healthy person. We need it for our health.
Laughing is healthy. That's quite clear. And laughing, all our organic processes gets faster a little bit. And this is another point and another question to look at that. Maybe we could go to that what Tara and what you was bringing there. When I look to a nation and the different humor the nations have, we could say this is coming out of the higher ego of the nation. Let's say I use that term, higher ego of a nation. And when we spoke before about that higher ego of the actor, and for the theater, so that's the individual higher ego. But when we have a nation, when we have the culture, this is embraced by another individuality of this nation. And I understand that even we see that in many things, and we can maybe understand that through this humor what has developed in the Jewish culture, the humor what has developed in the Irish culture, the humor what is developed in the German culture. I can tell you, it took me years to understand the Irish humor. I understood the words, but I didn't understand anything, while the people around myself were laughing. So that has also to do with the speech and with the spirit of the speech. Not only, but it is the spirit of the nation, or let's say the higher ego of the nation. And this is, of course, a wide and big question. But we see that also in our daily life, also more on a, let's say, more individual layer, when people had bad experiences, not for their soul. And after a time when they speak about, sometimes maybe everybody has also experienced it for oneself. Sometimes when we speak about it, when we have a distance to it, we start to laugh. Even we start to laugh about our pain we had, because we understand in a different and wider way where we have been, or where I have been in this situation, and what was around, and how blind I was not to see the way out, or something else. And this is a very deep and interesting question, and it's very much worth to ask oneself also when we go to any monologue, when we go to any play, when we go to any audition and acting, asking ourselves, where can I see the humor in it? And very often we find a nice humor in how words are used in a script, how a good writer set the words, and how can I, when I create for my character a kind of a distance to the character itself, how can I create a little bit humor even in a tragic situation? When I follow that, how the processes are described. So, but this, to understand, I need my creative ego to read that in a monologue, to read that in a play. And so it's Chekhov in this, here I have that book also, Lisa, we can share it. In that book, he speaks about 4 functions of the higher ego, and one is that we have on the other side not only a function, that it is something what one needs to develop also in the training. In the other books, in the Russian version and even into the actor, he is not so much focusing that 4 points in this way. He is more speaking about the 3 egos, or the 3 individualities which are present in the inspired performance. And there is also then to the actors, he speaks about that, out of this relationship, the higher ego and my personal daily life ego, how they work together to create the soul of the character, and then the I of the character as a non-realistic but real personality arises, and how I can find or try to ask the questions also for humor in it, also in relationship to the audience. So this is to play around with that and look from different sides to that things of the creative individuality, what has a different eye, looks with a different eye also to all the serious things and also to oneself.
I think that's a great Jorg, because I wanted to talk about that gift that having a sense of humor gives us regard in relation to that fictitious I that he refers to, the image of the character that really exists because we've made it up. And however you want to look at that, that if without that sense of humor, we become undirectable, as that sense of humor allows us to stay out of our lower ego's narrow perception of this is the one way, the one right way to do this. If we attach that one right way, then our ability to take direction from the image, not only from the director or inspiration from the prop, but we lose our ability to find that third ego that you've been speaking about, which is that merged sense where the fictitious and the higher and the lower all come together to offer, the audience an experience. So, that offering that you just brought, very important. Humor allows us to be directable, not only from the people that we're in contact with and the objects, but also with that higher I of the character. And part of our ability, of course, to be directable with humor goes back to what Ophir was talking about in terms of a sense of ease and the tempo rhythm, where I feel Jorg is referring to this in the writing, not just the word choice, but the tempo and rhythm of the writing, and how we work with that finding the right tempo is extremely important in the sense of humor, to allow the humor to come through. And an interesting opportunity exists in the same way that Mr. Chekhov invited us to identify the difference, for example, between our thinking forces and the characters, between our feeling forces and the characters, and between our will force and the character. We can also ask, what is the distinction between the humor, between my sense of humor? What is my sense of humor, and what is the character's? And based on the discussion that we're talking about today, I think it'd be an interesting personal know thyself journey to look at your own history in terms of your cultural identity, your ethnic identity, which may be separate from your cultural identity, right? Your family identity, and what is your personal sense of humor? Or have you only followed the influences of those external streams, or is there some sort of sense of humor within you that you haven't yet discovered? I know that was true for myself when I first began working in comedy. I could play the straight person, the straight man, so to say, and I couldn't do the clown, so the art of clowning was quite an enigma for me, and I really never told jokes very well. So I was witty and clever. There were people who, like, I had a director who had worked with me intensely for 2 years and said, Lisa, you'll never be funny. You're a dramatic actress. That's all you are. And I was so shocked by that, because the week before I had stepped into a devised performance with 3 hours notice and was hysterically funny to the audience. So I realized that I had a great deal of humor. And after that, I made over $500,000 as a comedian. But I had to, I had to be confronted with this very blatant statement that I wasn't funny, and discover that I was not funny because I hadn't found my creative individuality's sense of humor. So it's just an offer for you to think about finding your creative individuality sense of humor there.
Yeah. We had given in the first session of this 4 now, we mentioned this one exercise of Chekhov, how one can experience the creative individuality. And I would like to suggest one idea, what maybe can also help in the same direction, to explore what is the humor. And maybe you have already experienced, but this is looking back to the own life, to the personal life, in the history of it, and see some moments, even some painful or dark moments, and especially such moments when one was making decisions, and now from the point of view of now, 5-10 years or more later, one looked to that situation and to the decisions. There are so many moments possible to explore that one is inwardly laughing about oneself, seeing oneself in the situations in the past, and understanding oneself, because we know ourselves from the inside, we can remember, but on the other hand, we say, oh my God, how crazy, how unconscious, how silly, how funny one was. But it was me. It's very interesting. Oh my God, nice to look at me and laughing about myself with this kind of humor. That means fully accepting that this is what I'm in, what I have created as my biography. It is when I look from all the steps backward, I can see, understand my own life with a new humor. Maybe it's something what can make it enjoyable and also make you a little bit laughing when you can go to your own biography in this way.
I have Daniela who'd like to share something. So Daniela, I will unmute you.
Yes, okay. This is a question for Joerg for what he has just said. Can this be an exercise in order to recognize our individuality is expanding in the right way? Because actually I was wondering if I can just imagine from the point of view of an actor. Okay, I knew the method to make people laugh, to share my humor with other people, but is my individuality expanding in the right way, or I'm just convinced that how I recognize that I'm not running the risk to that I am just convinced of doing the right thing, even though I'm not. I don't have that sense of humor. I don't know if it is. If you understand what I mean, but yes. How can I recognize that it's not it's not because I'm convinced of being a person with humor, but actually I have a great sense of humor. How do I recognize that?
Joerg, do you want to take that up?
I'm a little bit
Or shall I start? Can I start?
humor-like, helpless. because I didn't fully understand the question.
Okay, I'm going to rephrase it, and Daniela, you tell me if I think I'm understanding it, what you're saying. How can I know if my impulse for humor is actually coming from my higher self, that I really have a higher ego that is helping my sense of humor, versus me sort of forcing through my own will or lower ego, that, you know, I want to do this because I think I'm funny when I don't really have it. Is that sort of what you mean?
Yes, is that, yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, if I think about, if I think backwards to things that happened to me, and I laugh on things that at the moment in the past were for me painful, can this maybe be an exercise to recognize that now, okay, my individuality is expanding in the right way? Can this be an exercise, or?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's absolutely a very good pathway to it. What do you think, Joerg?
I would say yes. It has to do to understand that one is looking to oneself from a different point of view. And this is not intellectual, it is not logically, it is not psychologically constructed out of any psychological system. It is just that my own, if I understood it right now, that my own higher being is overflying, going out of my body, and is overlooking my life events. And through that, I get a double sense. I get a sense about this individuality who is overflying it. It is an activity, it needs a will, it is very interesting point to go into it and look back. And on the other hand, I see the situations, and I see in the situations my lower ego at that time. And when I see that, then I understand, and out of that I can laugh, because from the point of view of today, I have different understanding about the situation, and I can only say, okay, that was my level I had in this time. And now I see maybe it was another opportunity there, was another possibility there, but I didn't see it. My lower ego didn't see it. I was not connected with my higher ego in such a situation. And now through that I can more and more develop also a kind of a sense of my humor at this one time, and at the same time from my higher being who is observing these situations.
How is that
Okay,
helpful, Daniela?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Who else would like to ask a question? We're going to wrap up real soon, but if anyone's got a thought that you'd really like to share, you can flag your hand, or Hadar. Hi, honey, I'm going to unmute you. There we go. Go ahead, Hadar.
Hi, everyone. So I have two questions, please. The first one would be, can you hear me properly?
Yes.
So the first one will be at the beginning of the conversation, Lisa, you mentioned that when we feel lost, when we feel that something was taken away from us, we go into the self to make ourselves feel better. I am curious about that process, what in the going back to ourselves is actually doing for us to improve our I don't know what it is. Is it just to improve our general overall feeling? Is it a comfort, or what is this process that you've mentioned? And the other one, I was curious if maybe you or you could share an example of a higher of a case where the humor is initiated or going through the higher self rather than a more mundane humor or laughter. Because if I got you right, you separate between the two. I mean, there's more than one way to laugh. You can also laugh if you see someone flip over a banana down the street. So yeah, walking down the street. So
Okay, so I'll start with that question about the sorrow, the nature of sorrow, and so the higher ego is, of course, what really lives in us in a way that lives in no other species. And because of that, we have the ability to actually change our physiology based on how much, for example, humor or pessimism we bring into our daily perceptions. So that the person who lives with a sense of humor will have a certain kind of lightness and ease. Their face and their body form will be more open and expanded. And someone who lives with a sense of pessimism and narrowness will come down into a contraction, will have, everything will begin to contract. If someone really wants to avoid that sense of contraction, then they go into this escaping. So rather than elevating and expanding to a good, healthy, objective perspective, they get unfocused. So they lose their sense of self. They go out so much to everyone else, or they experience the world. For example, someone might think, their whole experience during this time of COVID and isolation is all about how terrible their life is right now. And they start going down into such a tailspin that they can't feel the impulse for life there. And so that contracting through the lower ego takes that sense of the identity and makes one cling to it as if there is no outer, higher, greater force anywhere within themselves or in the outside world. In the polarity of that, where a person has lost, so here they need that sense of humor in order to give them the ability, the sense of hope, the beginnings of an expansion and connection to life spirit. For the person who gets too disconnected from the sense of their individuality, for example, it could be someone who's you get disconnected from it, you lose your sense of self. You feel like you're part of the larger group, but you don't understand where you are within that group. So you lost your sense of your personal self. The sense of sorrow shows that you are able to experience yourself because it's your sorrow. So it starts to bring you more deeply into yourself and separates you from this expansion. It brings you into defining, as it contracts, defining, this is mine, this is me, I have this experience. So if you, for example, lost a lover, your response to losing the lover can only be had by you. It's not going to be had by your parents. It's not going to be had by their child. It's not going to be had by their brother or sister. It's going to be had by you, because it's how it was torn away from your life. This part was torn from your life. These things that were taken from your life. Mr. Chekhov speaks of how we live with an image of our objective fulfilled. So I live with my husband with me for my life. I live with an image of my husband till death do us part. That's my death. I don't live with the image of him being gone while I'm alive. So when I feel that sorrow, that's mine as a widow. And that's a healthy sense of who I am. But if I allow my grief to take me to a point of suicide, I've really gone way too far. And that's when I desperately need humor. I need to be able to laugh and expand. So I hope that helps. Does that help, Hadar?
Very much.
Great. And Joerg, do you want to take up the second part of Hadar's question, please?
Yeah, but I need to hear it again.
Yeah, Hadar.
I was hoping to maybe if you could share an example of because if I understood well, you separate humor from the higher self to a lower self humor. For an example, so you've mentioned that not every laughter is a result of the higher self being humored through the higher self. So I was hoping maybe you could share an example for the higher self humor, if you can call it that way.
It's of course difficult now, excuse me, to give an example. Maybe I will find it when I speak a little bit. I hope it's one can follow that not all laughing is humor, and not all laughing and not all jokes are coming from the higher point of view. Many in daily life things coming just out of our daily life experiences. And even there are some surprising things, and we laugh about this, what is surprising there. And also in the daily life, laughing happens that we create an expansion. The soul goes out of our self a little bit, out of our physical limitations. And this with a higher self is the humor for the higher self. This is something what is, on the other hand, to develop, that I can see situations I'm not involved in daily life from another point of view, that I have there a relationship to it. And this is then what one could say humor, in that trying to finding the balance between that what I all understand in the higher sense, or in the wider sense of the understanding of situations. And the other point is the laughter itself is not only, the laughter itself alone is not a sign of humor. Humor can have as an expression also laughter, but all the laughters are not expressions of humor. You can very clearly hear that in such radio shows where there is one comedian is making jokes. And when you listen really to that, then you hear it is always a kind of recorded laughing, what they play in to the jokes of this comedian. It's artificial done. And this is far away from humor, from my point of view. Yeah, this is just on another lower level to making jokes and using the imagination of the audience that they laugh about that and giving the laugher as a trigger, the artificial laughing as a trigger to it. Maybe even that's helpful. I haven't studied it in the, or healthy. I haven't studied it in that way. So, and the other point is what I mean with that is that just for the art, when we look to the actor, that all acting, all art needs, in this term, I come back to it, needs to have temperament, needs to have certain quality in the feeling of ease, not only one. Has to have the four qualities, has to have a kind of a strength, has to have a kind of a flying over the things, has to be something what is really taking in and has something what is really looking about a kind of a feeling with everything outside. And to bring that to a higher level, for the acting, to develop that on a higher level, to see all the four possibilities of temperament in a play, in a scene, in a monologue, and bringing that to a higher level for you as an actor, then one is hopefully creating this, what radiates from that, then later as humor that makes the people who are watching, listen to it, also smiling inwardly, and it doesn't need to have the big haha. Even there are some very interesting moments always in good monologues where even the audience is laughing then when they hear it, when the actor could catch up the humor.
Excellent.
I don't know if that was helpful a little bit.
So we're going to wrap it up. Thank you, Hadar, so much for that question. I'm going to just insert real quickly things like a nervous laughter is, and nervous giggling and stuff like that is coming out of that lower self. It's a mask of the tension and anxiety. So that is one example of a situation where it's the lower ego that's laughing in a polarity to its inner contraction. So yeah. Quick little thing there. And as we wrap this up, Joerg mentioned, and we reiterate, that there's an extensive amount of medical and scientific support for the health values of laughter. There's laughter yoga, laughter therapy, people who have healed themselves of cancer by watching videos of comedy, stuff like that. So that uplifting sense of humor is definitely something that can work to enlighten, literally bring lightness and ease, to enlighten on the highest level. And we know all great spiritual guru type peoples demonstrate collectively a very warm sense of humor. You know, all the great people, in fact, there is a thing called the Zoroaster smile. So going all the way back to Zoroaster, there's an image of this warmth and humor and smiling from the higher spiritual, because they're able to rise above the condensed fears, anxieties, and stresses, and see, as we've been speaking, they're able to embrace all the gifts that humor in the higher ego provides us.
Yes, that's this point that the laughing in this way is helping to free the soul when the soul is too much stuck and not flexible anymore in the connection with the body. And the soul is not able anymore to be floating, flying, or being in a flexibility. And when someone is so stuck in oneself and with his thoughts, or with this feeling, with this emotion, and standing there, and then you can work with a laughing therapy in this way, or with humor. It releases first, and this releasing may help that the person find her center back and not get stuck in all these tensions and all these fixed ideas and fixed emotions. And laughing is breaking through a while and allows then afterwards maybe the self and the higher self can find a new relationship to the being in this world, in the situation of life itself. It is, yeah, that's another point, another question that leads to theater as therapy or laughing as therapy, and or the art as a great healer of the culture. That's what we do with the Chekhov work, I hope. What we could focus to deliver.
The Fool, the high card of the deck, and always surrounding the great leaders of the world, a fool to bring them back to their truth. And ladies and gentlemen, we hope you have enjoyed our venture into the higher ego and sense of humor. I thank Ophir for joining us, and for all of you from around the world. Say goodbye, Joerg.
Saying goodbye. Goodbye. Bye-bye.